2008. Francis Scott Key Mall. I'll never forget the day my instincts saved my friend. I had gone to the mall with my childhood friend Sarah. We had actually been catching up. I never had many friends in school, and in high school, she and I never had the same classes, and life outside of school for me was mostly sleep. Sarah was petite, small, and skinny, but I'd never call her frail. I was a tall, heavy-set dude with a bad limp. She would often joke that she felt safer with me because I looked like a big scary bear, and the limp made me look like a badass who always won. She knew I hated being seen as scary, but would often tease me, and this mall walk would be no different. After about 2 hours of walking around, we had been leaving Hot Topic when I felt like I was being watched. Like we were being watched. I finally caught the eye of some guy in sunglasses, a tan shirt, gray jacket, and black dress shoes looking at us from across the center of the mall. The most offsetting thing was him. He was clean cut, clean shaven, short black hair. Everything about him screamed official, but his clothes looked like he had grabbed them off the floor and tossed them on. At first, I thought he was a cop in regular attire, and that I had once again been falsely accused of stealing. Allow me to provide some background. The owner of the mall's Walden Books had taken a strong disliking to me after I accidentally busted their theft centers 2 years prior by falling over onto someone who was distracted talking to another person. Anyway, this guy following us never said anything, nor got close to us to try and stop us. I decided I wanted to see what he was really up to and lead us into Sears. Sure enough, he followed, but I didn't tell Sarah about him. I made a decision. There was a hall to our left for restrooms down by the service bays and waiting room, and a good 12 or so feet ahead was electronics. I asked Sarah to wait for me by electronics while I went to the bathroom. There, as I'd known for sure that we had passed the hall, this would mean I'd have to turn around and walk towards him a bit, then down the hall. His pace slowed a bit when he saw us splitting up. I glared him down as I came his way and then turned down the hall pretending to look at my phone, using it as a mirror. He clearly looked at me as his head turned, but he continued straight on past the hall. I turned into the bathroom doorway, and as soon as he was beyond view of the hall, I turned around. My turn, I muttered to myself and laughed a bit. I felt like a kid playing spy. I had guessed that this guy might notice me, so I came out of the hall and made my way towards tools. The tool selection wasn't separated by any walls, but just by the walkway giving me a clear view and cover behind toolboxes and shelves. He was following Sarah now, but still keeping a good distance. What annoyed me about this was Sarah never got the feeling of being watched and looked over like I had. In fact, both times she looked at him had been only as turning to look around the store. Now, I needed to know, but I wasn't going to cause a scene, or so I thought. I walked over from tools. Sarah saw me coming and joined me. We went back into the mall and then headed for a mall exit. Sarah had started to ask me why we weren't heading towards our cars, but a simple hand motion from me cut the question out. We walked outside, and he was a considerable bit behind us, so I rushed us through the 2 sets of doors, giving them time to close. We walked to the edge of the overhang and stopped. I explained everything while pretending to look for our cars and then turned around. In the area between the doors, there he stood, and now he had no way to avoid both of us seeing him directly. We walked back in, and he had turned standing against the side wall. I now stood in front of him. "What's up, Chief?" I asked, mocking a cop. Not a smart idea, but if he was a cop or even mall security, then he'd now have to call me out. He wouldn't look directly at either of us. "Gonna say I stole something? I've been minding my own fucking business. How about you mind yours?" I was now projecting at him. but he said nothing, and even having raised my arms at him, he didn't move and didn't look at either of us. I opened the door and waved Sarah through, stopping the door right before it hit his face. Sarah had hurried on ahead. I stepped through, and the next few seconds remained frozen in my mind. He sighed, almost as if relieved I hadn't hit him with the door. I walked in and took a slow pace. Sure enough, he followed. However, he hadn't noticed that I was now walking backwards. I backed right into him, and my upper arm caught the feeling of a holster under his arm as we bumped into each other. In Maryland at the time, concealed carry by civilians wasn't legal. I now knew something was entirely out of place. I was pissed off, but I was also lucky as mall security rounded the corner to the exit. "Gun! He's got a gun!" I yelled. He backed away from me as mall security came running up with a taser drawn. "She's lucky you're so annoying," he had muttered as he continued back towards the exit and mall security followed. I didn't stick around to find out anything. I ran for Sarah, grabbed her wrist, and took off through the mall towards the security office. The head of security in the office was not exactly thrilled to see me, but was aware of what had gone on. Apparently, they had been watching since we entered Sears, and the tapes showed them that this man had been following Sarah since she parked, and had actually only started trying to hide himself when she met up with me. The most unreal part of all of this, though, is that they caught him, but released him when he produced an official government ID and number. To me, I don't care if he was God himself. This isn't the type of behavior you just let slide. A little bit about me before I get into this story. I am and have always been a very small girl, standing at 4'11", full grown now at 27 years old. And I have always been able to pass as being much younger than I am, especially if I'm not wearing makeup. When I was a small child of about 7 or 8, my father bought a little cabin in a town in Texas called Livingston, in an area of Livingston called Onalaska. I specify because of the second part of the story. Anyone with kids needs to be wary of the area. The cabin was really nothing remarkable at only 600 square feet. It was really just one giant room, a teeny kitchen the size of a normal bathroom, and a bathroom the size of a large closet, and a porch out front. The whole property consisted of 2 lots, so there was plenty of space, but the cabin itself was dinky. This whole area was in a strange mix between backwoods and suburbia. It was a true neighborhood, but not the prim and neatly kept neighborhoods I was used to in suburbia Houston. Despite this, it became a very fond place for me, and some of my greatest memories in life are at that cabin, including my evacuation story from Houston during Hurricane Rita, but that is a story for another day. When I was around 11 to 12 years old, my father bought me a 4-wheeler, and the little lake town suddenly became a lot bigger. I didn't go super far, but I definitely ended up going further than I ever had gone before, and it was quite common to see me zipping up and down the roads with a pile of neighborhood kids on the back of the 4-wheeler when we would go up to the lake house on weekend visits. This was around 2001 to 2002, so cell phones were a thing, but it was still common for people to not have them. Usually I had a beeper that I carried around, but with no phones at the lake house, my father gave me a walkie-talkie with a very long reach instead. Looking back on it, now from a world of cell phones, this seems like a bad idea, but this was a small town and we had spent so much time here that it felt safe. So on one of these weekends, I was buzzing around my neighborhood like I usually did, and I stopped at this peninsula that overlooked the lake. This was a set of docks that us kids always came to when we wanted to swim, despite the very real threat of giant alligators. But being stupid kids, we really didn't worry about that. And I was overlooking the lake when my walkie-talkie buzzed to life. Naturally thinking it was my parents trying to reach me, I answered quickly. I couldn't quite make out what they said at first, so tried confirming that it was my dad. This point in the neighborhood was a little ways away from the cabin, but I had reached my parents from this point before, so despite the fact I could not quite recognize the voice, I assumed it was my dad. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first. I don't remember exactly how the conversation went, but it was off enough that I remember being slightly annoyed. Garbled questions that I answered, but no answers that would have hinted who I was or where I was. Eventually, the conversation started to drift in a way that I knew something was off, but I was not alarmed just yet, as my dad was notorious for pulling pranks on me and goofing around. I kept talking, stupidly. Alarm bells weren't going off yet. Finally, though, the guy on the other end of the walkie-talkie made a comment. I cannot for the life of me remember what he said exactly, but it was enough to make me doubt that it was my father. This is when things took an extremely creepy turn. Bear in mind, I had been talking to this guy pretending to be my father for a good 15 minutes, sitting on my four-wheeler on this peninsula. I can see you. You should come take a ride in my boat, he said. My father had a boat, but this was so out of character that it made me realize it wasn't my father. Dad? You're not Dad, are you? What are you talking about? He said. If you can see me, I started, feeling a bit peeved that this guy had been messing with me. What am I wearing? He paused for a second, before the walkie crackled to life, and he said very clearly, You're wearing an orange shirt, you have red hair, and you're sitting on a red four-wheeler right by the swim docks. Why don't you come ride in my boat? At this point, my eyes widened and my blood ran cold. This entire time, some strange guy that I don't know had been watching me, from God knows where. It took me maybe 10 seconds to look around wildly and then kick the four-wheeler up and race out of there so fast that the wheels had a hard time catching the ground. I remember the wheels spun out against the gravel beneath them, and when the four-wheeler finally started moving, little me had a hard time holding on. I floored it the entire way home, stopped in the middle of the yard, and burst into the house. Obviously, the first thing I did was ask my parents if they had contacted me, which they had not, and hadn't for hours. I was in such a panic that there was no way my dad wouldn't have confessed had it been him. He was a practical joker, but he knew when the fun was over. I hate to think what might have happened had I continued sticking around in the area, or if I hadn't figured out that it wasn't my dad pulling my leg. Nothing came of this incident, though, and my childhood up there resumed as normal. Eventually, the weekend visits stopped, but the story doesn't end there. During my parents' divorce, I moved to live at the lake house permanently with my father, or at least until we could find something better. This was the only place we could go when he left my mother, which is a long story in and of itself, but I won't get into that. My father had recently suffered from health issues, so I took a job at a nearby gas station / tobacco barn to pay the bills and let him recuperate. Thankfully, the lake house had no bills save for electricity, water, and internet, so my small salary was enough to keep us going. I only worked there for 3 months, but those 3 months were by far the creepiest I've ever experienced. Within the first month, a rather tall and obese man became infatuated with me, and he couldn't have been creepier. He had short crew-cut hair and slightly unkept beard and mustache combo. The first time we ran into each other, he stared at me with these wide, crazy eyes, ordered his gas, and just stood there for 2 to 3 solid minutes, just staring. When I asked if I could help him, he said nothing. Now, the part of the tobacco barn I worked in was strictly the gas side, and I was pretty much in a glass box with an opening to take people's money and give them their cigarettes, which I could not have been more thankful for. Several times that this man came to visit, he would leave to pump his gas after staring at me awkwardly. About the fourth or fifth time, after I thought he had left, I hear a knock on the other side of the barn on the glass. There he was, face pressed against the glass, staring at me with this wide, manic grin and waving at me with just his fingers. It was enough to send me running for my manager when he left, demanding to go on break before I peed myself. The last time I saw him, I will never forget though. It has been etched into my mind so deeply that I doubt bleach would scrub it away. He arrives as he usually did and orders his gas. This time, however, he reached through the hole in the glass and grabbed my hand before I could put the cash away in the cash register. It wasn't a violent grab, but it was firm enough to keep me from pulling away, being a very sheltered 18-year-old. I froze in place. "I love you," he said, refusing to let go of my hand. I simply stared at him, unnerved at alarm bells ringing in my head. "Say it." What? I responded. "Say you love me." Naturally, I just wanted this guy to go away, and being so freaking scared out of my mind at this point of him, I stammered and said it out of impulse. Maybe he would let me go and go away. "I love you?" I said, uneasily. "Call me if you need anything." "What's my number?" he asked again. This threw me off completely, and the look on my face probably gave away my confusion, because he repeated himself, despite my stammering that I did not know. Finally, he said something that made my blood run cold. I felt like I was going to throw up. "It's 911. He winked. This guy was the sheriff deputy, the person I'd have to call if I got into any sort of trouble in town, the person I'd have to call if I had a medical emergency, or if someone tried to rob me. And he wouldn't let go of my hand. I just nodded, trying to keep myself from shaking bad enough for him to feel it. He had never pulled up in a police car or anything, but when I talked to my manager, she confirmed what he said as being true. Once he did let go of me and went on his way, I retreated to the back and demanded to be relieved from the gas station area. I didn't care. I just did not want to see that guy ever again. Thankfully, we moved soon after, so I never had to. But I will never forget the leering grin that man gave me every single time he purchased gasoline. You'd think moving away would be the end of this story. But no, it got even worse when I went to college. And you wouldn't think that would be the case, considering I was in Galveston. I had needed to go to my counselor to discuss a few things, and this usually involved about 30 minutes of chit-chat, as my counselor and I had become close while I was attending school. During one of these chats, which my father had attended due to him attending school and the same classes I was in an effort to finally get his degree, I mentioned Onalaska, Texas, and how he had owned a lake house up there. Instantly, the happy expression left my counselor's face. She informed me that she had been a social worker in that area for quite a few years, and suddenly, my childhood playground took an extremely dark turn, and that the sheriff at the gas station became a nightmare. Apparently, the area was notorious for pedophilia, kidnappings, and other horrible, horrible incidents. Whole neighborhoods, including police officers, were in on it, and it was common for people trying to out the incidents to either go missing or be completely thrown out of the community through intimidation tactics. She proceeded to tell me of several cases she had worked on, careful to leave out confidential details, of course, including incidents of entire families being in on the whole mess. When I told her about the sheriff I had encountered, she kind of went pale and wouldn't tell me anymore, except that she wasn't surprised. The conversation went on for over an hour and a half, but it was enough to make me never want to return to the small town I had called my childhood summer home, and vowed to never, ever bring any children I might have in the future there. So, to the guy who intercepted my walkie-talkie signal and tried to lure me to his boat, and to the creepy sheriff, let's never meet again.